Jabberwocky, from Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking-Glass. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome-raths outgrabe. Beware the Jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jubjub bird, and shun the Phrymius Bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the manxome foe he sought. So rested he by the tumtum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as in uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock, with eyes of flame, came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with its head he went galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjoyous day, callooh, callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig, and the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wabe. All mimsy were the borogoves, and the mome-raths outgrabe. Read by John Baumhoff for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu.
Puzzles from Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. Puzzles from Wonderland. 1. Dreaming of apples on a wall, and dreaming often, dear, I dreamed that if I counted all, how many would appear? 2. A stick I found that weighed 2 pound, I sawed it up one day. In pieces 8 of equal weight, how much did each piece weigh? Everybody says 1/4 pound, which is wrong. 3. John gave his brother James a box. About it there were many locks. James woke and said it gave him pain, so gave it back to John again. The box was not with lids supplied, yet caused 2 lids to open wide. And all these locks had never a key. What kind of box then could it be? 4. What is most like a bee in May? Well, let me think, perhaps, you say. Bravo, you're guessing well today. 5. 3 sisters at breakfast were feeding the cat. The first gave it sole. Puss was grateful for that. The next gave it salmon, which Puss thought a treat. The third gave it herring, which Puss wouldn't eat. Explain the conduct of the cat. 6. Said the moon to the sun, "Is the daylight begun?" Said the sun to the moon, "Not a minute too soon." "You're a full moon," said he. She replied with a frown, "Well, I never did see so uncivil a clown." Query, why was the moon so angry? 7. When the king found that his money was nearly all gone, and that he really must live more economically, he decided on sending away most of his wise men. There were some hundreds of them, very fine old men, and magnificently dressed in green velvet gowns with gold buttons. If they had a fault, it was that they always contradicted one another when he asked for their advice, and they certainly ate and drank enormously. So, on the whole, he was rather glad to get rid of them. But there was an old law which he did not dare to disobey, which said that there must always be 7 blind of both eyes, 2 blind of one eye, 4 that see with both eyes, none that see with one eye. Query, how many did he keep? End of chapter. Read by Lorraine Montgomery for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu. Solutions to Puzzles from Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. 1. 10. 2. In Shylock's bargain for flesh was found no mention of the blood that flowed around, so when the stick was sawed in 8, the sawdust lost diminished from the weight. 3. As curly-headed Jemmy was sleeping in bed, his brother John gave him a blow to the head. James opened his eyelids, and spying his brother, doubled his fist and gave him another. This kind of box then is not so rare. The lids are the eyelids, the locks are the hair. And so every schoolboy can tell to his cost, the key to the tangles is constantly lost. 4. Twixt perhaps and maybe, little difference we see. Let the question go round, the answer is found. 5. The salmon and sole puss should think very grand is no such remarkable thing. For more of these dainties puss took up her stand. But when the third sister stretched out her fairy hand, pray, why should puss swallow her ring? 6. In these degenerate days we oft hear said, manners are lost and chivalry is dead. No wonder, since in high exalted spheres the same degeneracy in fact appears. The moon in social matters interfering scolded the sun when early in appearing, and the rude sun, her gentle sex ignoring, called her a fool, thus her pretensions flooring. 7. 5 seeing and 7 blind give us 12 in all we find. But all of these, 'tis very plain, come into account again. For take notice, it may be true that those blind of one eye are blind for 2. And consider contrariwise that to see with your eye you may have your eyes. So setting one against the other, for a mathematician no great bother. And working the sum, you will understand that 16 wise men still trouble the land. The End. Read by Lorraine Montgomery for Lit to Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu. The Two Clocks by Lewis Carroll. Which is better, a clock that is right only once a year, or a clock that is right twice every day? The latter, you reply, unquestionably. Very good, now attend. I have 2 clocks. One doesn't go at all, and the other loses a minute a day. Which would you prefer? The losing one, you answer, without a doubt. Now observe. The one which loses a minute a day has to lose 12 hours or 720 minutes before it is right again. Consequently, it is only right once in 2 years, whereas the other is evidently right as often as the time it points to comes round, which happens twice a day. So you've contradicted yourself once. Ah, but, you say, what's the use of its being right twice a day if I can't tell when the time comes? Why, suppose the clock points to 8 o'clock. Don't you see that the clock is right at 8 o'clock? Consequently, when 8 o'clock comes round, your clock is right. Yes, I see that, you reply. Very good, then you've contradicted yourself twice. Now, get out of the difficulty as best you can, and don't contradict yourself again if you can help it. You might go on to ask, how am I to know when 8 o'clock does come? My clock will not tell me. Be patient. You know that when 8 o'clock comes, your clock is right. Very good. Then your rule is this. Keep your eye fixed on your clock, and the very moment it is right, it will be 8 o'clock. But, you say, there, that'll do. The more you argue, the further you get from the point, so it will be as well to stop. The End. Read by Lorraine Montgomery for Lit to Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu. The Walrus and the Carpenter by Lewis Carroll. The sun was shining on the sea, shining with all his might. He did his very best to make the billows smooth and bright, and this was odd because it was the middle of the night. The moon was shining sulkily because she thought the sun had got no business to be there after the day was done. It's very rude of him, she said, to come and spoil the fun. The sea was wet as wet could be, the sands were dry as dry. You could not see a cloud because no cloud was in the sky. No birds were flying overhead, there were no birds to fly. The walrus and the carpenter were walking close at hand. They wept like anything to see such quantities of sand. If this were only cleared away, they said, it would be grand. If 7 maids with 7 mops swept it for half a year, do you suppose, the walrus said, that they could get it clear? I doubt it, said the carpenter, and shed a bitter tear. "O oysters, come and walk with us," the walrus did beseech. "A pleasant walk, a pleasant talk, along the briny beach. We cannot do with more than 4 to give a hand to each." The eldest oyster looked at him, but never a word he said. The eldest oyster winked his eye and shook his heavy head, meaning to say he did not choose to leave the oyster bed. But 4 young oysters hurried up, all eager for the treat. Their coats were brushed, their faces washed, their shoes were clean and neat. And this was odd because, you know, they hadn't any feet. 4 other oysters followed them, and yet another 4. And thick and fast they came at last, and more and more and more, all hopping through the frothy waves and scrambling to the shore. The walrus and the carpenter walked on a mile or so, and then they rested on a rock conveniently low, and all the little oysters stood and waited in a row. "The time has come," the walrus said, "to talk of many things, of shoes and ships and sealing wax, of cabbages and kings, and why the sea is boiling hot, and whether pigs have wings." "But wait a bit," the oysters cried, "before we have our chat, for some of us are out of breath, and all of us are fat." "No hurry," said the carpenter. They thanked him much for that. "A loaf of bread," the walrus said, "is what we chiefly need. Pepper and vinegar, besides, are very good indeed. Now if you're ready, oysters dear, we can begin to feed." "But not on us," the oysters cried, turning a little blue. "After such kindness, that would be a dismal thing to do." "The night is fine," the walrus said. "Do you admire the view?" "It was so kind of you to come, and you are very nice." The carpenter said nothing but, "Cut us another slice." "I wish you were not quite so deaf. I've had to ask you twice." "It seems a shame," the walrus said, "to play them such a trick, after we've brought them out so far and made them trot so quick." The carpenter said nothing but, "The butter's spread too thick." "I weep for you," the walrus said. "I deeply sympathize." With sobs and tears he sorted out those of the largest size, holding his pocket handkerchief before his streaming eyes. "Oh, oysters," said the carpenter, "you've had a pleasant run. Shall we be trotting home again?" But answer came there none, and this was scarcely odd, because they'd eaten every one. The End. Read by Lorraine Montgomery for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu.
You Are Old, Father William, by Lewis Carroll. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat. Yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his grey locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple. By the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box, allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak, or anything tougher than suet. Yet you finish the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how do you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law, and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever, yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. "Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." The End. Read by Rick Kistner for Lit2Go on the web at fcit.usf.edu. edu.